Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. What I'm going to tell you today I think is super important, but I also have a lot to cover in a pretty small time, so I'm going to say it really fast, see if you can keep up. I know a lot of you that have been watching this channel, you might think, oh yeah, it sounds really good what you're on about with all of this hope, but how can I actually know that any of this is true? And how can I know that any of this is actually going to be significant for me? Because if it's not true what you're talking about in the Bible, and if the Bible isn't really the Word of God, then it doesn't apply to me. So maybe you kind of want in on this stuff that we've been talking about and this connecting with God, but you're just not sure if it's legit. And so I'm going to share with you right now a few reasons that I find personally really convicting as to why I believe the Bible is the Word of God. But I need to start with just one thing. You see, if I was to ask a lot of Christians if they need to have evidence for their faith, then a lot of Christians would say, no, it's not necessary that I should have evidence for my faith. But the truth is that we do need to have some sort of evidence for our faith. Otherwise, we could end up believing in things that are completely false and completely untrue. For example, if we go through life with this notion that we don't need evidence for our faith, we can end up going through life believing in some pretty crazy things. Whatever people tell us, whatever comes across our path, and whatever we choose to believe in, and it could be crazy things. But if we have evidence for our faith, that keeps us grounded and keeps us believing in the right things. So faith is not the absence of evidence. In fact, for faith to function correctly, there needs to be an intellectual element to it. And so this for me is the intellectual element of my faith. So in the Bible, in Isaiah 46 verse 9, God makes this claim. And the claim is that He is God and that there is no one else who is like Him. And then He provides something to substantiate that claim with. And that is this, verse 10, Isaiah 46 verse 10, where He says, I make known the end from the beginning and from ancient times the things that are still to come. So this is God's claim to be God, and then also He provides something to back up that claim, which is, I make known the end from the beginning. Well, let's put that to the test, and let's see if the Bible really does make known the end from the beginning. In the book of Daniel in the Bible, in chapter 2, there is a king who has a dream, and it's a pretty random dream. It's just a dream of this statue basically, and it's made up of all different types of metal, and the king can't understand the dream at all. And he loses sleep over it, and so he calls his wise men in, and they can't understand the dream either. And then eventually Daniel, who believes in God, he comes to the king and he says, listen, I can't tell you the interpretation of the dream, but God can. This is the interpretation of it. And you can find it in Daniel 2 if you want to read it. I recommend highly that you do go read this. And this is the interpretation of it. He says, well, look, Nebuchadnezzar, we're in Babylon and you are the head of gold. This is the first kingdom. And then he says, after this, another kingdom will arise and will be inferior to you. And then after this, another kingdom, and then another kingdom. And he goes through all these kingdoms and lists their attributes. And then at the very end, it says there will be a divided kingdom. Now you think, well, that seems pretty generic. So maybe there's nothing to that. Maybe he just got a lucky guess that Europe, as it stands today, is pretty divided. And a lot of people have tried to unite Europe, and a lot of people have also failed. But you could say, well, maybe that's a lucky guess. And so let's have a look at where it goes a bit more specific in Daniel chapter 8. In Daniel chapter 8, and if you get a chance to read this, I highly recommend that you do, Daniel has this really random vision. He sees a goat and he sees a ram, and the ram has 2 horns and the goat has 1 horn, and these 2 animals charge at each other. The goat overthrows this ram, and then this horn divides into 4 smaller horns. Pretty crazy dream, pretty crazy vision. But then an angel comes to him and he gives him the interpretation of this dream. In chapter 8 verse 19, he gives him the interpretation of this crazy vision that he's seen. And this is what it is. He says, I'm going to tell you what will happen in the later time, because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. And then it says, the 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Mede and Persia. And the shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. The four horns that replace the one that was broken off represent four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation but will not have the same power. I don't know if any of you are history buffs, but the book of Daniel was written in the 5th century BC. That was before any of this actually happened. But if you're a history buff, you would know the Medes and the Persians overthrew the Babylonians. This was written before this happened. The Medes and the Persians overthrew the Babylonians, and at this time Greece was just a small kingdom, but he had a vision with the interpretation that Greece would become a great kingdom and would overthrow the Medes and the Persians, and that there would be one really strong king, and after that king, the kingdom would be divided into 4 different parts. Now here's what happened. Alexander the Great, that great Greek warrior who we've heard so much about, he rose up and he conquered that whole European and Middle East area of the time. But then his kingdom was divided into 4 parts, because when he died, his kingdom was divided amongst his 4 generals. And it's really interesting to me that God knew that this was going to happen before this happened. And then the really cool thing is this, that as we read on through the book of Daniel, it actually explains to us what happens after this, and even down more towards our time. I pointed out about how it talks about how Europe would be divided, and we see that. We see evidence of God predicting the future in the Bible. I know that's a lot, and I hope that makes sense. I'm going to leave it there for now, and next time I'm going to come back, I'm going to talk about the experiential evidence for faith through the Bible. Subscribe if you want to see that. See ya.